What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Odin, coming to you with another video! And today, we're going to be talking about the box office numbers, and specifically the battle going on at the box office between Venom and A Star Is Born. So everyone should know by now that there was word that came out right before Venom came into theaters that there were Lady Gaga fans, people who wanted A Star Is Born to succeed, very much so, were artificially driving down and bad-mouthing Venom before it even came out, and this was a very big thing that was being talked about, but it was mostly with audience members, again, people who are actual Lady Gaga fans, not really infiltrating as much of the critics' consensus as would be concerned, but we now finally have a little bit more robust information. Again, we have more critics who've come out. We also now have an official audience score as well, so we're going to be able to look at not only the differences between the two films as far as how they're being viewed by critics and audiences, but also how that correlates and how that relates to the general box office information that we have for the estimates for this particular weekend. So first we start off with Venom. So Venom, again, 32% from critics, not very good by any means. It really is a rough thing overall. I mean, the average rating was a 4.5 out of 10, meaning again about a 45 out of 100. So a failing grade on the average. Because keep this in mind when we talk about Rotten Tomatoes. Again, when we look at that 32%, because oftentimes people look at that and say, why is that different? Well, 32% is just talking about how many, like what percentage of all critics' reviews gave it either a positive or a negative review. So in this case, only 32% of all the critics who were being asked or who submitted any type of review, only 32% of them gave it a positive leaning review. Now that could be, again, right on the edge of, a 2.5 to 3 scale. It could also just be, again, very just on the very cusp of being considered fresh when you look at the 5-star scale, or even the 10 out of being scored out of 10 as well. And so it's somewhere on the fresh side. However, overall they gave it a positive review, saying that yeah, it might have had some issues, but at the end of the day it was overall enjoyable. But even with this, we see that not only is it only 32% of critics like the film, but also the average rating was also 4.5, which is not very good. Again, 45%. Again, as a teacher, if one of my students was to get a 45 on a test, that would be quite abysmal. But does that mean that this film is beyond all hope? Well, this is where we go to the audience rating, because of the audience rating, and I honestly thought that because of the things I was reading from critics, I thought that the audience rating would actually correlate, because it sounded like, and this is also going not only to the critics on Rotten Tomatoes, but also going to the critics that I trust, and that I usually go to get their opinion on certain movies if I'm kind of questioning whether or not I want to see it or not, like people like Jeremy Johns, and they also said it's there's some parts that are fun, but overall it's not a very good film. So it seemed that was going to be the case with audience as well. But what we see here, 89% of audiences say that they like it, and that Jeremy put a review on this channel as well, talking about the issues that he had with the film. But I think it is still very important for us to understand this difference, this dichotomy that exists when it comes to overall reviews. That yes, a film can still be bad, but can still also perform at the box office because it has just enough entertainment value to keep most general audiences happy. Again, every person is going to have different tastes. Some people are going to love certain films that other people hate, and some people are going to hate certain films that some people love. I know that there's a lot of people out there who, if you take one of the most popular films that's ever existed, if you look to films that almost universally are acclaimed, like for example, The Shawshank Redemption or The Dark Knight, there are also people out there, I don't know why, but there are also people out there who would say, I wasn't a fan, or I didn't like these certain aspects of the film, because again, that's where subjective opinion comes in. Now, if they were trying to say, objectively it's flawed, well then I'd have a problem with that, because again, there is an objective reality with film as well as a subjective reality, and we have to be able to differentiate the two. So objectively speaking, it seems like, based on what I've read, and again, based on the general consensus we're getting, not just from critics, but also even some audiences as well, because even if audiences like it, they will still say, oh yeah, I mean, it wasn't a good movie. It's not going to win any Oscars anytime soon, but it was still a good time. I mean, even they will admit that, objectively there's flaws to this film. However, subjectively, it seems that for the most part, you're more likely to enjoy this film than not. But also, keep in mind that this is made for a particular audience. Critics usually are not, and again, there's always exceptions, usually are not blown away when it comes to superhero films, unless there's some kind of social element to it, or unless there's some kind of political agenda to it, or at least in their own minds. They usually don't give, superhero films the upper 90s ranking. Again, it's very rare that that actually happens when you actually have a very, very well done film that's impossible to ignore. But we've seen really good superhero films that we thought, should deserve, 95% of all critics liking it, but hasn't actually come to fruition. Venom seems to be on the other side of that, where, again, it might be fun. Again, audience score kind of gives us that inclination that it's probably a good time for most people. When I look at the audience scores, I feel like, okay, you have an 89% chance of going into the film and liking it. Now, of course, that's not exact science, but that's kind of how I usually go into the film. That's why when it's usually, a low critics And a low audience, it's like, okay, so maybe there's a 50-50 chance, maybe even a little bit less than that. So, again, that's overall what we have that. But what we see there is 14,000 user reviews have been submitted for this film, which says that a lot of people are putting reviews there. If you go to IMDb has this at a 7.1, which for IMDb and for most general films is not bad. It's saying, okay, so it's enjoyable. Again, a good chunk of people seem to like it. Now we go over to A Star is Born, the one that, oh man, all the Lady Gaga fans were like, oh my gosh, we gotta drive up the score, we gotta drive down Venom because, oh my goodness, it has to win because it's Lady Gaga. You don't need any of that. You want to know why? Because it's a good film. I saw this film opening night, or actually I saw an early showing of this in Dolby, and I will say it's a great film. The soundtrack is fantastic, and this is coming from a guy that's not a big fan of country. I actually like the music in it, especially the country numbers. When I started getting into the more of the poppy stuff, I was like, I can, live without it, but wasn't really trying to get people on board with the music as she was progressing in her character and as she was becoming more popular. Because again, if you've never seen A Star is Born, it's a movie and a story that's been told several times over the past 100 years or so, and it's been remade several times throughout that time. The only version that I'd ever seen before was the one with Judy Garland, which was amazing. To me, this one is almost comparable with it as far as its quality is concerned. Bradley Cooper is an amazing director, gives a great performance. I think if anyone, everyone's talking about, Lady Gaga, Oscar buzz. Don't get me wrong, like, she gives a great performance, but if we're going to talk about any of the performances in this film, it's Bradley Cooper. Bradley Cooper not only should get nominated for acting, but also for directing too, because he directs this thing flawlessly. It is so well done. Him and the cinematographer especially come together and form some of the best shots that I've ever seen when it comes to, modern filmmaking. It really reminded me a lot of some of the great films as of recently. Go back to Gravity, when you go to The Revenant, where you had those really beautifully shot films. This is obviously a more toned down version of good cinematography, because you're not dealing with action shots, you're dealing more with storytelling. And to me, when a drama has very good cinematography to the point where even the camera work alone can tell its story and can convey information to the audience, I think that it's a very powerful thing to see. Because there were times when I would step back and say, oh my goodness, I see what they're doing with the shot. I mean, filming a reflection of somebody, and the reflection is distorted, and it's talking about how the character of this person is becoming distorted as the film goes on. It's just a very powerful thing overall. But getting to the critic score, we see a 90% of critics, so 90% of all critics like this film. 86% of all audiences like this film, which means you're very likely to go in there. You have a very good chance of coming out liking this film. But just as a point of comparison, before we actually get to the box office numbers, look how many user ratings there actually are. And this is with people trying to push out the scores to try and get it to perform better than Venom did, which, let's just be honest, it was never going to happen. Anyone that thought that A Star is Born was going to outperform Venom is just living in a fantasy world. There's just no way in modern day times that would ever be the case. But with that being said, 5,565 audience ratings, which again, it's not terrible. It's not a very good thing. It's not a very bad thing. But guess what? Compared to the 14,000 of Venom, it also therefore makes sense as to why A Star is Born, when it comes to its weekend estimates, made $56.6 million, because it is going through a set of being released slowly over time in various areas, and so it's going to make a lot of money. This film is going to be very, very successful, and not just because Lady Gaga's name recognition, but because it's a good film. There's some people who say, and I read this in a lot of the negative reviews, saying it's Oscar baity, it's Oscar baity. Okay, well, Oscar bait doesn't automatically mean that it's bad. To me, you can say something is Oscar bait, saying, oh, it's something that Oscar viewers and Oscar voters would very much like to see, but that doesn't make it a bad film. There's obviously films that rely so much on that, overhanded messaging. For example, I'd go with, La La Land as an example of that, saying, oh, let's try and, push this out, and then the story suffers, and then the overall film suffers. Star is Born doesn't really do that. Again, you could say that there's Oscar bait elements to it, but overall, it's a good time, and this film is going to make a decent chunk of money. Again, $56.6 million, but again, it ended up losing the weekend battle, which was no surprise whatsoever to Venom. So Venom domestically made $80 million, but when you take in the foreign market, this film is already at $205 million on a $100 million budget, which means that by next weekend, it will have broken even, which is just a truly amazing thing when you think about it, especially if it keeps going in this direction. Obviously the bad critic ratings is going to hurt it. Some of the other people, but some of the other people's, on YouTube, sometimes they do have a pretty decent amount of sway when it comes to being able to affect overall audience scores, because a lot of people, millions of people, watch those videos and say, okay, so I'm not going to go see this, I am going to go see that. But what we see here, once again, is going back to that Rotten Tomatoes score, enough audiences are liking this. If you even go to Cinema Score, which is, sometimes not perfect, but usually it's a pretty good indicator, it got a B+. Venom got a B+ from Cinema Score, which means that a good chunk of audiences were coming out saying, yeah, I liked it. I had a good time. And guess what? That shows in the overall box office score, with it getting $205 million. This is a film that could easily get to $500 million plus by the end of its run, which means it's going to vastly outpace Solo, which, oh man, everything now can be compared to Solo, because if something that is not as big in name recognition as Star Wars gets, more money than Star Wars did, it, probably says a lot about the current state of Star Wars, but that's for another video altogether. But guys, what are y'all's thoughts on this? Have you seen Venom? Have you seen A Star is Born? Please let us know in the comments below. Which one do you like better? I honestly think it's so hard to compare these films because they're so different. Again, the people going to see Venom are most likely, in most situations, not the same people who are going to go see A Star is Born. And there's probably more people out there, based on the fact that we have the evidence of the box office, that we're going to more likely go see Venom because it's an action film. It's a superhero, or in this case specifically, an anti-hero comic book movie that a lot of people are usually going to go out and see. And so therefore, there's more audience there for this type of film, especially since it's been established with the MCU, with the DCU to a lesser extent, and to other things. But we see this happening nonetheless. And A Star is Born is going to be more for people who are not only fans of Lady Gaga, but also more of the film connoisseur types. That's the best way I can think of it. But really, I think general audiences will like this film as well. I mean, if you don't have a problem with, movies that have a lot of music in it, or movies that tell a very, very distinct story that if you know anything about it, you know how it's already going to end, I think it does it well. I think it does it very effectively. It's a very good modern take, modern interpretation of this classic tale. But I would love to hear your thoughts on either of these two movies down below. And also, do you think, because there's some people out there who honestly think A Star is Born is going to outperform Venom. I think that's impossible. I just don't think that's going to happen, especially with the fact that this one stuck as 56 million, where the other one is at 205 million. And it's going to keep on making money. But I would love to hear your thoughts on the comments below. Guys, if you like this video, hit that thumbs up, smash that like button, give us a subscribe. We do a lot of great work here on this channel. We are constantly expanding, not just to movies, but to gaming, to so many other things. If you've not checked out Sports Wars, please, guys, check out the Sports Wars channel. I take part in a wrestling podcast every single week. Not really a podcast, but a wrestling show every single week where me and a couple dudes talk about wrestling. So if you're a wrestling fan, go check that out as well. It's really great. And also, guys, please go check out my channel at Odin's Movie Blog, where I talk about movies and a variety of other things going on in the culture, specifically within the realm of television and movies. But guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and as always, God bless.